And I believe we are recording. Julie, do you see the button?
Yes, you're good to go. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Waldrop, take it away. We're on air.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to all of you for joining this racing committee meeting. It's been an annual event for many years, and hope you'll find it very informative. Ordinarily, I would ask everyone to introduce themselves. This is a little bit of an awkward format. It'd be hard to do it in line. Because we're recording, I assume that that's going to serve as our attendance for this, and we'll just proceed on that basis. So I think you can all see who else is on the call here. As we go through the agenda, I do encourage you to raise your hand. If I can't see it, Brian, let me know. Let's encourage people to participate by asking questions. There's nothing here that we've got an hour and a half. I think we've got a modest agenda. We do have a special guest joining us in a few minutes with Leader McConnell's office, who will talk to us about some COVID relief. But let's start by approving the minutes from our last meeting. Those minutes were sent out by Brian last week. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at them. And at this point in time, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented. They were from the June 9th, 2019 meeting. Any questions or comments? Any changes, additions, or deletions? If not, I'd like a motion to approve those minutes. We have a motion, and do I have a second?
Second.
Okay,
Jim.
We have a motion and a second from Jim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
On your move button. Let's just say, if anybody objects, go unmute and say you object, and we'll assume that you voted in favor. All right? So again, before we begin, start into it, I remind everyone that typically we as a group, as an organization, we have standing positions, and we will discuss those positions on various pieces of legislation. But by and large, we'll be reviewing these from the standpoint of what we've done in years past. So let me find that agenda again. The first item on the agenda for us is sports betting legislation. So here's, I'm going to take that first, and let's take a look and see. This issue came up, as you recall, back in 2008 when the Supreme Court overturned PASPA, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, in the case Murphy v. National Collegiate Athletic Association. I won't go through all the legal details, but since the overturning by the Supreme Court of PASPA, states have been free to pass their own laws with respect to sports betting. And we've seen several states that have pursued it in some way or another. A list of those that are considering it, or in some stage of that, including from a racing perspective, includes Arkansas, Colorado, and Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, I think Mississippi, not a racing state, but they're looking at it as well. Of course, New Jersey's probably done more than anyone. New York has done something, Pennsylvania as well, West Virginia. I know there's discussion right now in Florida. Pardon me, not much is happening in Florida. Maybe we can hear more about that. Kentucky has a bill that didn't get very far last session, but it'll be back this year. California, I think they're on a referendum path for 2022. And New York, I think there's some talk about expanding that. So we don't talk much about the state level here. That's where most of the action is. This time last year, we were expecting some activity at the federal level. We were expecting Chuck Schumer in New York to come back with his bill that would have provided some framework for sports betting legislation. That has gone nowhere. The states have, at this point in time, are free to pursue what they want within the confines of existing federal law related to the Wire Act and what have you. And so that's the way it's gone. I don't see that changing. Certainly it's too late in this session for any change, but next session of Congress, we don't see any significant talk about sports betting. And at this point in time, it looks like they're going to continue to let the sports betting legislation at the state level control what happens going forward. The American Horse Council typically has not taken a position. Certainly not we're continuing to monitor it, to evaluate specific federal proposals and bring those to the attention of the membership and of this committee. At this point in time, because there are no federal proposal, we'll just leave it at that.
Alex, did you say how many states have gone forward with sports betting?
Well, let's see here. I
It's 18.
gave you a list. I wouldn't
18.
call this a definitive list. I'm not probably. I would say, let's see. I'm working off something that actually that Brian has helped put together.
Yeah, Alex, according to
Is it
the American
18?
Gaming Association, we have 18 states plus DC who have some sort of legal single game sports betting operation live.
And it's under consideration in probably 10 more.
That information is good as of the 1st of October.
Yeah. So yeah, there are several states that have done stuff, and there are others that are on their way to doing things as well. So we'll just keep monitoring that situation as we go. So the next item on the agenda, unfortunately, Brian, I can't read the agenda now that you've moved on, and
Oh, there we go. You should see it again. There we go.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, great. So next on it is the COVID relief matters. Ron, I'm going to let you take the first shot at this, or do we want to push this back and wait until we get the folks from the senator's office online? Do we want to just wait for this entire discussion? Probably should.
We could do that, or we could talk about the industry-specific matters now. By the way, the McConnell staff, Terry Van Dorn and Mason Foley, will be joining us at 2 o'clock. And at that point, discussion will be strictly off the record. And I will actually pause the recording during that discussion per the leader's office's request. So that's your call, Chairman. We can either talk about the industry-specific issues now, or just to let you know, the people in McConnell's office will also discuss other issues besides COVID-19 relief.
And so they'll be joining us at about 2 o'clock, did you say?
Yes, we're going to dial in at
So-
2 o'clock by phone. They will not be appearing by video.
I think we probably should take it all up at one time so that
Okay.
there's some continuity. Let's hold off on the discussion of COVID relief until later in the meeting.
Sounds good.
So that we can, at that point in time, we can discuss with them, and they can comment on any specific relief and all that. So let's go to the next item on the agenda, which is the COVID-related travel bans. Let's get to my document here. So this issue came to light in late summer. You may recall that President Trump issued 3 specific proclamations suspending the entry of aliens, that's their word, not mine necessarily, coming from China. That would include Hong Kong and Macau. Iran was also, there was a travel ban from Iran, and a third from the Shenzhen area, which think of that as essentially the European Union, United Kingdom, and Ireland. When they issued those proclamations, the president created an exception for those whose entry would be in the national interest. And that determination as to who is that determination as to national interest was to be made by the Secretary of Homeland Security. So fast forward to midsummer, and we realized many of the sales companies, Keeneland and Fasig-Tipton in particular, but also the Breeders' Cup, realized that these travel bans could very much negatively impact the September sales and also the Breeders' Cup and its ability to bring in not only fans but also participants. So we began the process of reaching out to, we being a group, the NTRA, together with Keeneland, Fasig-Tipton, and Breeders' Cup, and the Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, well, actually the Kentucky Horsemen's Association, the KTA, the Kentucky Thoroughbred Association. We reached out to Secretary Wolf, who's the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, and we made our case for a national interest exemption, not only for the Breeders' Cup, which was immediately recognized as part of a broader sports league national interest exemption, but we also made the case that there are a group of elite buyers, about 200 international buyers, who would be coming to the U.S. for purposes of buying thoroughbreds at these elite sales. And so we actually enumerated the individuals that needed to be admitted. We made the arguments about how expansive these sales were, not only nationally, but internationally. We indicated to Secretary Wolf that the urgency was there because we needed the ability to bring people in for September, understanding that these use exemptions extended to Florida, to other states, so that we weren't just focused on Kentucky, but we began in Kentucky because those were the ones that were most soon to occur. But we were able to convince the Secretary to issue an exemption. It came very close to the beginnings of the sale. It wasn't easy. It took quite some time. But as of now, there are national interest exemptions in place for specific identified buyers who are attending sales not only in Kentucky, but Florida and elsewhere. And also this, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have many people coming to the Breeders' Cup World Championships, participants, perhaps some fans as well, who will be there on the basis of this national interest exemption. So we were happy that we were able to get that done. This is separate from the visa process. Fortunately, there's a visa waiver system in place, and we were able to make that work for people traveling over primarily from England and Ireland, but also some from Shenzhen. So at this point in time, I think there is it's a good story to tell. We were able to convince the Department of Homeland Security. If there are others out there who know of similar issues, we certainly have some experience that we would share with you as to how to go about the process. We learned quite a great deal. But at this point in time, I think the Department of Homeland Security is very familiar with our industry, with our industries and the international nature of the industry, and they're supportive of the national interest exemption where it's appropriate and where it would support this the buying and selling of thoroughbreds, as well as the international competitions like the Breeders' Cup. Any questions or comments there? Do I see maybe a question? Question?
Let's see. Sure. Pull up the chat here.
You see it, Brian?
Yeah, I don't see any questions, but I'll continue to monitor that.
Okay. I saw something come up on my chat, and I thought maybe that was a question, but apparently not. In any event, it went well. We're happy to be able to support the sales companies and the Breeders' Cup in their attempt to make it work, and it has worked, and I think it was helpful to the sales and will continue to be throughout the fall and as long as these travel bans are in place. Okay, with that, let's go to the guest worker visas, H-2A, H-2B. That's going to be you, Brian, and Eric Hamelback.
All right. Well, I'll kick off the guest worker visa discussion, and Eric will backfill other parts of the developments we've been experiencing. Just so you know that despite the obvious changes in a broad market demand, the horse industry continues to explore ways to provide relief for ongoing labor shortages, which really haven't gone away in our sector. And despite higher unemployment rates and even rigid policies from the administration, AHC and its partners have successfully advocated for cap flexibility for H-2B within the FY 2021 spending bill for DHS. This is identical to the provision of FY 20 spending law, which passed back in February. And it's a bill that did create visa flexibility by giving DHS discretion to effectively double the number of visas authorized by the statutory cap. Annual appropriations do remain the focus of our advocacy. The likelihood of passing legislation to address long-term labor needs is very low, especially considering the pandemic and election season. That said, the administration has chosen not to exercise its discretion in 2020 to maximize its flexibility. On March 5, DHS announced that it would release 35 supplemental H-2Bs, up from 30,000 in 2019. And mind you, they had discretion to issue up to about 65,000 more visas. In April, as unemployment claims began to rise, DHS did announce that the agency would continue to review H-2B, thereby delaying possible release of supplementals. In June, the administration issued a proclamation announcing that it would suspend issuance of new H-2B and other visas through the end of 2020. During a White House teleconference with AHC and other business groups that very same day, administration officials insisted that this suspension was more of a pause. They also stated they would revisit the pause periodically through the end of the year. In addition to lobbying for H-2B visas, the industry also fights for flexibility on the H-2A front. This is the Agricultural Guest Worker Program. Last fall, AHC submitted a comment letter to the Department of Labor urging federal regulators to adopt efficiencies when processing the H-2A certifications. Before submitting the letter, AHC met at the White House with staff to discuss proposed efficiencies and ways to clarify broader industry eligibility. White House staff did not give assurances that proposed industry definitions would be included in a final rule. Staff did advise, however, that recommending inclusion of specific equine jobs would be more compelling than advocating for broad definitional changes of agricultural labor. And as you know, expanding this statutory regulatory definition has been something that we've been fighting for the past 2 years. And while it is successfully inserted the bills that are introduced, we're still fighting to get that into law or final regulations at some point. At this point, the White House Office of Management and Budget has been reviewing the near final H-2A modernization rule since August. The administration could release it any day. I looked at the Federal Register on Friday, and it still isn't out yet. So it might sound a little bit unusual to some people on this Zoom call that we'd be fighting for guest worker visas during a job crisis, basically. But I'm going to turn it over to Eric Camelback, who has really been hearing a lot of anecdotes and boots on the ground with respect to the labor demand issue.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Alex. Yes, the workforce shortage, as several on this call will attest to, including Remy Bullock, has really not gone away from our industry during this COVID pandemic, where there were a lot of folks laid off. If you look back to, and dovetailing a little bit on what Alex and Brian have already spoke about, you look May of last year, you had May of this year, Representative Cotton in Arkansas basically asking the president, asking the White House and the administration to stop H-2As and Bs just because of the amount of unemployment that American workers were seeing. So we went through the summer, certainly a big campaign for us, and with Brian and the H-2B Coalition in July, working on the Appropriations Committee with Representatives Harris and Pingy to allow Department of Homeland Security to approve some H-2B visas that led into August with the administration actually releasing some of the restrictions, and I'm reading here, the administration exceptions were to include non-farm animal caretakers, which, with the help of Congressman Barr's office, to get clarification that the horse racing industry was included in that. So with all of that, we continue to hear, and as Brian said, anecdotal, but more of a personal conversations with trainers throughout the country, most of which can be very vocal when they need something, right? But talking to Dale Romans in particular, who's a huge advocate for H-2B workers, still having trouble. We communicate quite frequently with Todd Pletcher's office. I know Alex and I communicate with Maggie quite a bit, trying to give them updates. Chad Brown as well. So there, there's some high-profile trainers, but ultimately even in office or in racetracks smaller that aren't on the limelight, Minnesota at Canterbury. I mean, literally with folks going out of business because they've had these H-2B workers, and now all of a sudden it's difficult to get them. So while we all are on different pages with some items in this industry, we can't be on different pages when we push for our workforce shortages, whether it's developing programs here in the States or continued push for our H-2B visas. And ultimately, as Brian and I have talked about before, some of the initiatives that would help bring at least our industry underneath some more of the H-2A umbrellas. We hope that Senator Paul will try to get his H-2A, H-2B combo back going again at some point. We still felt like that had a lot of merit for at least for the horse racing industry in particular. So I'll turn it back to you, Alex or Brian, if there's any other questions. Hopefully that was beneficial.
Let me make one observation, Brian, and then talk a little bit about next Congress. First, I think it should not go without notice, and you have mentioned it, that in that June 22nd release, actually, no, it was the August release from the State Department, which is important because you got to keep in mind that when it comes to these visas, the visas are issued through the Department of Homeland Security in conjunction with the Department of Labor. But the boots on the ground in many cases are the State Department in those countries where the individuals present themselves to receive the visas and transport into the US. And so the State Department in August, on the 12th of August, did specifically exempt caretakers of non-farm animals. That was language that was developed precisely for thoroughbred industry. Congressman Barr, Senator McConnell, others were very helpful. Getting that language was not insignificant. That's the first time we've ever seen people really focus on our specific issue as it relates to the H-2B ban. Now, this was only relating to the the State Department, which meant those individuals who had been frozen in the country of origin and couldn't come over because of the June 22nd suspension issued by the Trump administration. That gave them the chance to come on. The State Department was saying, I know you think you can't come on, but if you have a visa in hand, we'll now work you to the system and get you to the US. There's a small number of people. That's why it didn't help much. It's only dealt with that small number of people who already had a visa in hand, but they just couldn't make the trip across the border because of the proclamation from the Trump administration saying can't come into the US. That's what's significant. I think another issue that we have to, it's sort of the elephant in the room, but we need to talk about it, is where we see where we see immigration policy going in the years ahead, because you have to ask yourself, is there a difference between a Trump presidency and a Biden presidency? And I'd love to entertain, gentlemen, I'd love to entertain your thoughts on that. My sense is that we've got an uphill battle. We've got tough sledding. If we continue to work with the Trump administration, I think you're going to continue to see difficult times ahead. Certainly no talk of comprehensive immigration reform. I did hear the other night from Biden a suggestion of comprehensive immigration reform of a sort. Of course, it's one thing for the president to try to develop a policy. He needs to get a lot of people in line in Congress, both the House and Senate. So I don't think that you can say that Trump will not develop a comprehensive policy. Biden will, but I think you might see some additional conversation taking place Having said that, we've had, because of the Trump administration's general reluctance, we have developed good relationships in both House and Senate with people who now understand the issue and might be willing to take it on for us, irrespective of the person and the occupant in the White House. Brian, what do you think about that?
Well, this will definitely take place, be resolved at the election level. And we've got two parties with diametrically opposed views to immigration. As we say on the Hill, and Alex, you pretty much started this labor is a labor issue, not necessarily an immigration issue. To look back at other Congresses, even when one party has had control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, they've still had a difficult time in passing comprehensive immigration reform, which would be an umbrella that could address these issues.
That's a good point, Brian. Labor looks at it from the standpoint of workers and worker compensation. They view temporary non-immigrant temporary workers, foreign workers, as a potential factor to drive down labor costs and therefore hurt salaries for U.S. workers. So they're reluctant to embrace it. And of course, the Department of Homeland Security looks at it from a security standpoint, which is a different perspective, looking at it more as just a sort of a general reluctance to bring in more people into the country because of whatever challenges they perceive. So you're right. It's not a Democrat versus Republican issue, liberal versus conservative. It's much more nuanced than that. We've been talking about comprehensive reform as long as I've been running these meetings, and I can't say I see a clear path through on this one. Eric, do you see it any differently?
Alex, no, I don't. I mean, I really feel as if this is going to continue to be an uphill challenge. Certainly appreciate the H2B coalition and the efforts that they give. But again, I still think if we can progress with H2Bs, as you of course know, if we could ever get that funding for the return to worker exemptions ever funded legislatively, or again, what my hope is to try to work in some sort of H2A, H2B compromise that Senator Paul has pushed forward. To me, it's still going to be an uphill battle either way, no doubt about it, whichever administration we're dealing with.
Yep. So we'll continue to fight on that one, see where we can.
And to revisit some of the legislation we did lobby on prior to the onset of the pandemic, the furthest these bills have been able to advance is at the committee level. So it's been a challenge even getting these bills on the floor for a vote. But at least up into those preliminary steps, we have been successful in inserting language that would give more certainty to the industry.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other conversation about the guest worker visas?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in chat, so.
So let's talk a little bit about the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. There's been a lot of talk about it. Hopefully no one is finding out for the first time that there is a federal bill that's moving. It's moving through Congress. It has actually passed the House in September and is now in the Senate and being actively considered in the Senate. Let me give you some of the highlights and sort of talk about where we are right now. It is, of course, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. It will be run by an authority, a nonprofit or a not-for-profit corporation. It would be a 501c6. The purpose has been stated as to establish uniform safety and performance standards for horse racing, to improve the safety and welfare of equine and human participants in horse racing, implemented through comprehensive compliance and accreditation programs, including an anti-doping and medication program and a racetrack safety program. So it will be governed by a board of directors, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority Board of Directors. That will be a 9-person board. 5 of those individuals will be independent directors, and 4 of those directors will be industry of directors, which means they have some prior connection with the board. Importantly, that at that board level, there are strict conflict of interest rules that would apply to any of the 9 individuals, including they cannot have a current financial interest or provide goods and services to what is referred to as a covered horse. Let's just consider that the industry for now. They can't be an official or an officer in any equine industry representative or serve in any governance or policy-making capacity for an industry representative. And they can't be an employee or have a business or commercial relationship with any of the individuals. These conflict of interest provisions apply only or specifically to these board of directors. The chair does need to be an independent director from outside the equine industry. It's important to note that we've got strong independence rules in place here because we believe that that's key to making a credible, decisive governance structure for the industry. Underneath that board of directors, there will be 3 committees, one of which has already been formed, the nominating standing committee. The co-chairs have already sent out communications, hopefully to each of you on this call. If you're not, let me know. We can get you something. The nominating committee is made up of 7 independent members. They've been selected from business, sports, and academia. I apologize. Somewhere on my computer screen, I have those 7 individuals. I'll come back to that in a minute when I get those. That nominating committee will be charged with first identifying and selecting the 9 members of the authority board of directors. Again, 5 independent, 4 industry directors, all of whom have to be conflict-free. They will also be selecting the 7 members of the Anti-Doping and Medication Control Committee, chaired by an independent director of the board of directors, comprised of 4 independent members and 3 industry members. Importantly, those 3 industry members will not be subject to those conflict of interest rules. Same is true with the Racetrack Safety Standing Committee, appointed by the nominating committee. Chair in this case could be an industry director as opposed to an independent director. That chair will be subject to the conflict of interest rules. And 4 of the 7 members will be independent members of the Racetrack Safety Committee. 3 industry members. Once again, they can have conflicts and be on that. So you have the 9-member authority, no conflicts, and 3 standing committees, each made up of 7. In the case of anti-doping, 4 independent, 3 industry, racetrack safety, 4 independent, 3 industry members, and of course the nominating committee, which is they're entirely independent members. So we've talked about the conflict of interest rules. I think the standing committees, their responsibilities are self-explanatory. They will be focusing, in the case of the Anti-Doping and Medication Control Committee, it'll be focusing on those issues pertinent to anti-doping and medication. Same with the Safety Standing Committee, and the Nominating Committee will begin with this blue ribbon panel that I mentioned just a minute ago. The enforcement of this act will be undertaken on the anti-doping side by USADA, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. They'll be contracting with the authority for a 5-year program, and they will help put flesh on the bone of this anti-doping program. There will be a role for state racing commissions. That's yet to be determined, but there will be some working together. So the process, let's talk a little bit about the rulemaking process. We'll have the standing committees who will make recommendations to the authority board of directors. The authority board of directors will have the responsibility for approving those rules that will be that the industry will be subject to. But those rules will then have to be submitted to the Federal Trade Commission, who will be the federal authority overlooking it all, necessary there for constitutional reasons. Then you have a general enforcement and review process, closely following what you see now with the USADA, with ultimate review of these issues by federal agency, the FTC. A lot of details there, but we won't get into that today. So let's just talk a little bit quickly about what we see happening in the next 9 to 12 to 15 months, because we are operating under the belief that this bill has a high likelihood of passage because of the support of the Majority Leader, Senator McConnell. We're in the process of getting the Horse Racing Integrity Authority Board of Directors in place by naming the Blue Ribbon Panel, getting those entities up and established. Of course, we have to pass the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. Once the full board and the standing committees are finally put into place, then they will put together the uniform standards, submit those to the board. The board then files those proposed rules for the FTC. The FTC will publish those rules, and the regulations will go into effect if this occurs prior to January 1 of 2021. Then these regulations will go into effect January 1, 2022. If for whatever reason approval goes beyond the first of the year, then it's a 500+ day lag time between passage and implementation. Those are the highlights. There's lots of discussion about funding, and those are issues that I'm sure everyone is interested about. That will be left to the authority to determine the proper way to assess costs. There's still a lot of work to be done there, and probably too soon to say anything in particular. But I will say that I'm happy for anyone to jump in right there. I give you that detail. I will also say the American Horse Council has not, and is not in a position to take a position on the Horse Racing Integrity Act at this point in time. Really haven't taken much in the way of impact or input from other all of its constituencies. This is purely informational here today, and I don't give it to you as an advocacy measure, but more as an informational effort. With that, I'll open it up for questions. Brian, anything you would add to that, or Julie, anything that?
Alex, you've had one question, and it was asking if you could clarify if the board of directors will be a paid board, or is this strictly a voluntary opportunity?
They will be paid. Okay. How much is yet to be determined. At this point in time, there is a per meeting fee that is being paid to the Blue Ribbon Panel, but ultimately we're not expecting this to be a volunteer army. There will be significant resources expended. We'll be asking people to give significant time, and for which that we anticipate compensation.
Thank you. And the second follow-up question was, could you clarify in this current bill what breeds are included? Well,
specifically in the legislation right now, it applies only to thoroughbreds. However, there's a section in there that suggests or that states that other breeds may choose to opt in to the program. They may, or there may be state regulatory authorities who may make the determination that in their state, they will subject one or more other breeds to the terms of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act.
Thanks, Alex.
But at this point in time, a nationwide determination that another breed is subject to the Horse Racing Safety and Integrity Act, Integrity and Safety Act, would have to come from the breed registrations themselves. The only way individual other breeds could be subjected is through state by state determinations or decisions.
Very good. And at this point, I don't see any more questions in chat on that issue.
Brian?
Yeah.
This is Lonnie. I have a question for Alex or somebody.
All right.
I'm curious, and I don't know if they've gone that far. Let's say this body, they're bound to make some mistakes. Let's say one of their mistakes is how they ascertain funding. And what if we as an industry, let's say it includes everybody on the screen, sees this decision that's driven largely by people outside the industry, and it's going to be an insurmountable cost to pass on. Let's use two of the most abused groups, owners and players. But somehow, some way, when we as an industry go, oh man, this is going to absolutely blow up what revenue model we have going. How do we go about communicating that, and how is a bad decision overturned by this group? Does it require legislation, require a bunch of hearings? Do you have to go from them to the FTC? I mean, how are they going to handle when they do make a mistake?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll take a stab at it first, and I'll certainly invite others to give their views of this. One of the important aspects of this legislation is does not provide detail about funding. There's nothing set in stone here about who pays or how much any one individual or groups of individuals pays. It's left to the authority to determine. And just like with state racing commissions, it's essentially a regulatory matter that can be changed. It can be altered by the authority itself. There are some strictures here about how the authority must go about assessing the cost, but it doesn't say how much or to what extent. So all this is going to be within the realm of the authority. And that's the beauty of it, is that it does have flexibility built into it. There were some that wanted to put a great deal more detail in this legislation, but I think the wiser course was to give broad structure to the organization and to the process, and then give the authority the ability to create a system, a process that works for the industry, but also ensures the safety and integrity of the business. So there will probably be some adjustments as we go down the path, but it can be done by the authority. It does not require literally an act of Congress or even a figurative one. This is something that the authority can handle. And there will be plenty of opportunities, including members on the standing committees by industry participants. There'll be plenty of input and plenty of places in which that input can be received by the, it can be channeled to the authority. But that's a good point, Lonnie. This has to be a nimble process. It has to be able to change to accommodate the industry as it evolves. Anyone else that would like to add to that response? I think, I guess another way to say it is let's wait and see what happens, and let's be vocal when we think things need to change.